Hi, Sumit. Let's start at the beginning.
Good morning.
What inspired you to write your novel, The Dead Don't Talk? And how long did it take for you to get it written once you were struck by inspiration?
Frankly speaking, I had started this book as purely as a Byomkesh Bakshi mystery. The fictional sleuth from Bengal by Sardindu Bandyopadhyay, and he has a pan-India following. So in that respect, what I understand that the stories of Byomkesh Bakshi are copyrighted, but not the character themselves, or rather the character themselves, Byomkesh and his other characters. So the original story was a Byomkesh Bakshi mystery, and the fact that it was he calls himself a truth seeker, Minded calls himself fact seeker, stemmed from that fact. And I just like to inform all my readers that if they find any similarities between Byomkesh Bakshi and my character, it was because that it was written originally as that story, as a Byomkesh Bakshi story, and it took me around 12 months to write this book. Then another 7 months to do 3 edits. So yes, it took me around 19 months to arrive at the complete end.
Okay, so let's talk about people who have, always been the heroes of crime fiction, in the sense that there's a lot of Western writers like Agatha Christie, Conan Doyle, Edgar Wallace, Earl Stanley Gardner. There's a whole range of Western writers who have excelled at the genre. So, do you see shades of gray in their characters? And who are some of your favorites among these writers?
My personal favorite has always been Conan Doyle, though I admire the other writers as well. Agatha Christie perhaps more than the others after Conan Doyle. And what I admire about Conan Doyle is that, firstly, Conan Doyle has been inspiration to most writers of detective fiction and overall authors who came subsequently, including Agatha Christie, in the structure of a detective having a sidekick who narrates the story from his point of view. It has been imitated by various writers, and I think the most recent addition is myself. But here, I'm sorry.
Your novel also has a main detective and a sidekick, right?
Correct.
In your novel also.
Yes.
Yeah. So what is the function of the sidekick? What is the function of a sidekick in a detective novel? What function does he or she perform?
One thing I feel is that the story progresses in a much more linear fashion if there's a sidekick, and instead of jumping to various side plots. The sidekick acts as a narrator, and he acts as a voice in the head of the readers. The assumptions which the sidekick makes are any points or questions which might arise in the mind of an intelligent reader who's trying to solve the case while reading the book.
That's right.
That is, I feel, one of the main important things a sidekick brings to the story. And you refer to gray shades. Gray shades, yes. My personal favorite, Holmes. He is definitely a virtuous person, but he does have shades of gray. He's a drug addict, firstly. A strong drug addict, which is a cocaine addict. Other points, he has very strong likes, dislikes. His indifference to women is almost always on misogyny.
And and he also has a sort of violent streak in him, right? He has guns. When he feels bored, he just shoots at the wall. There is a certain violent streak in him as well.
That. Yes, he does that.
Yeah.
Not to refer to the fact that in the very first time when Watson meets Holmes, just to perform an experiment, he was actually beating up the dead bodies in the morgue to see
how many
bruises are formed on the dead body. So that is not something you find in a normal person.
No, but I guess that's what makes it different and exciting.
Yes.
Because you wouldn't want, you don't want just a beautiful, virtuous hero who does, who finds out who the criminal is, but it's completely boring if you write it like that. So you do want shades of gray in the main character.
Which makes him stand out, which makes him unique, let's say, a stronger character.
Right. And that's why we remember him so much. He
Correct.
stands he's etched in our memory.
I agree.
So let's move on to Indian writers who are doing really well with this genre. They are writing quintessentially Indian stories set in India, various Indian cities, various locales, various periods in India's history. And, readers are really warming up to them. So there is Abir Mukherjee, there's Sujata Masi, there's Vish Thamija, and of course there's Vikram Chandra, who wrote Sacred Games,
Correct.
which is like a classic in the genre, of course.
Right.
So, do you think Indian writing in English is doing justice to crime fiction now? And it has got its due by now, with all these writers sort of jumping into the fray and winning awards and critical acclaim as well.
Yes, I do think the Indian writing is coming of age, especially in the crime fiction genre. And I think it's a very welcome trend that Indian authors are making their mark in the world of crime fiction, not just in India, perhaps internationally as well, where all the
Yes.
authors mentioned by you have done very well, and some of them are actually NRIs who are based abroad and have
Right.
carried the stories of set in India to audiences across India's borders. So I think that is and if I can replicate even a fraction of the success, I'll consider myself fortunate if I can follow in the footsteps. And since the discussion, the shades of gray, you mentioned Abir Mukherjee. I've read
Yes.
all his books. His detective Stan Wyndham has definite shades of gray in his character. Few of his traits are perhaps a signs of the times in which the story is set in, of pre-independence India and he being a British police officer. So there are times when he acts which he considers his duty, but we may feel as Indians that it is something which was perhaps not right. Perhaps his judgment is
Yeah.
clouded regarding how he speaks to even his sidekick, Surendranath, and how he behaves with him, depending on political events at that point of time. And other shade of gray I definitely find in him is that he's also a drug addict, Ella Holmes, but
Ah.
on a much stronger scale. Holmes at least consumes drugs when he is not on a case, he's not mentally stimulated.
Yes.
But in his case, it is a necessity. Sam Wyndham has to consume drugs on a daily basis just to
Okay.
keep himself alive. So that is a
The
different shade
function.
of gray over there.
Right. Okay. Since you mentioned that it is set in pre-independence India, we would really like to hear how important is setting in a crime novel, because in your novel, which is set in Calcutta in the 70s, I feel is also a character in your novel. It's not just a plain background. It figures a lot into your story. So how important is the setting in a crime novel, and what kind of research did you have to do about Calcutta in the 70s before you wrote your book?
The setting is very important. The setting is very important in the sense, firstly, it also affects the way the sleuth investigates the case. I mean,
Correct.
if you have it in the modern genre, you have all kinds of electronic gadgets,
Gadgets,
mobile,
yeah.
internet. You can access a lot of records electronically. So he has a lot of help
Right.
to solve the case. Sorry. But in the case of, depends on, if you go back to the early 1900s, in Sam Wyndham's case, he has to basically rely on documented records. And his case is also, in the case of Abir Mukherjee, the plot itself is also affected by the events at that point of time, as I mentioned earlier, political events, cultural events.
Right.
Those affect the very nature of the plot, the character themselves, the character developments. As you progress from, say, post-independence, India come down to the 60s and 70s, where my story is set in the 70s.
Yeah. 70s.
You have the kind of political unrest which was visible in the state of West Bengal at that point of time, when you had the Naxalite movement. And that one affected the social milieu, the kind of culture, social interactions people had with each other, the
Right.
law and order situation. So those also affected the kind of plots which people did think about. Like at that point of time, many stories were set in the Naxalite backdrop, and the Naxal, those characters
Yeah.
had a prominent role to play in those stories. Though in my story
Right.
also there's a person who's involved in the movement, but that's a kind of a side plot,
Side. Yeah.
or really
Yeah.
doesn't feature in the main plot.
Yeah.
And you asked about how important it is for the research. Yes, I depended a lot upon the works of people like Satyajit Ray, Sunil Gangapadzai, and Shishendu Mukherjee, whom I've read, who have written about
Yeah.
characters in that period, how the period was
Uh-huh.
like. Plus, I also relied on my own personal experiences, however dim it is and how dim my memories of that point of time of the Calcutta of the 70s. The second
Did you
part.
grow up in Calcutta?
I didn't grow up in Calcutta, but we used to make annual visits every year to visit our relatives. I grew up in
Family.
Bangalore over there, but family
Okay.
visits were there
Okay.
every year, but sometimes twice a year. And
Yeah.
from the late 70s, from a teen onwards, I was in Calcutta for a period of around 5, 6 years before I again moved out from education.
Right. Yes. So all those impressions, the personal impressions, must have gone into the making of the book, I'm sure, because we carry all those memories with us, and
Absolutely.
they come in handy when you're writing your book.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The other important question I wanted to ask was, people think, writing a crime novel or a detective novel is just about having, okay, throw in some action, throw in a murder or two, some violence, and then there is the chase. You fight the bad guy. But it's actually much more complicated than that, isn't it? How important is it to have well rounded characters, and how important is it to stress on character development? Because your story, your novel, has several characters, and I feel each one of them comes alive. They're all three-dimensional characters. So it's not just a good guy and a bad guy, and in the end, the bad guy is caught. So every character is given special attention. So how important is it in crime fiction for character development to happen? In your opinion, what do you feel about
In my opinion, character development is very important. So I'm just a debut writer, but whatever weight my opinion carries, I feel it's very important because most of the books which I've read, which are considered classics in the mystery genre, the crime fiction genre, it is the good character development which differentiated the book between a good book and a great book. And given the
this?
genre, this particular genre, the kind of characters which the writer tends to develop, one is bound to have multiple characters. And if you want to have a good storyline, there will be multiple characters, each one with a motive for the crime. And the motives may range
Right.
from various reasons, from revenge to self-preservation to keeping somebody's secret to protect somebody else. And in each case, the perpetrator of the crime may have good reasons to commit the crime from his point of
Right.
view. But perhaps not from the law's point of view, that you can't take the law in your hand, but from his point of view, at that point of time, he may have been compelled to commit a particular crime. A crime he may not have committed, he may have condoned under different circumstances.
Right.
And so,
You also have to engage the reader. So I feel like more than the actual crime and the detecting part of it, people who read the book, if it's a crime novel, they will get engaged because the characters are interesting. Suppose the
yes,
characters are all flat and one dimensional, even if the crime and the action is, high octane level, I feel the engagement level will be low. You have to get the readers hooked to the characters, right?
absolutely. And to a certain extent, the reader may have to identify themselves with the character, sympathize with
Yeah.
the character, and feel that yes, there's a justification
Yeah.
about what he has done. Whether it is wrong or right, that's for the law to decide.
Yeah.
But for example, if I
Correct.
take the gray shades in the book, in the one of the most classic murder stories, though not by an Indian writer, the Murder on the Orient Express.
Right.
The character who was accused of the murder, the person did it because there was a failure of the system to give him justice. As a result, they were forced to commit the murder because they didn't get, they went to the law and the system, they were failed to give them justice, so they were forced to commit. So at the end of it all, you feel perhaps, yes, what they did was right. And if that character was just a black and white character, you may not have felt the same empathy for them at the end of the book.
Yes.
And
that is the trick, I think. That is the trick. You know, correct. You have to make the readers root for the character, even though what they are doing falls somewhere between black and white.
I agree. But at the same time, if I can just add, at the same time, I feel that the good character development can also be done without having shades of gray. For example, again, if I take the example of Holmes, again, coming back to my perennial favorite. Yeah. His most notable nemesis is Moriarty, who features in perhaps just 2 of his stories, or actually 1. He's mentioned in just a oblique manner in a couple of other stories. But you still remember him as his nemesis, whom Holmes himself calls an evil genius and a Napoleon of crime, because he is pitted against him as an equal. In other stories, Holmes he just solves the case very easily. The villains and the enemies, though they may have shades of gray, they may have a justification why they did it, really are not a match to him. But in this one story, though Moriarty was a purely evil character, there was no shade of gray in him. You can say in terms of black and white, Holmes was white and Moriarty was black. But we remember that because he was a very strong character himself in his own way. So that character development is also important.
Something that stands out in memory. That's the trick.
Yes.
They should not be just bland. Yeah. The reader has to remember the character. That's
right. Even
so let's talk about some of the characters.
Yes.
Let's talk about some of the characters in your novel. Okay. There is a large cast of characters because it's a huge family, and every member, at some point in some chapter or the other, every member finds the spotlight falling on them. So, can you name some characters in your novel who have shades of gray? And what are these aspects about them? A few of your characters.
Yes, because personally, I found it more difficult to create character who has shades of gray than just a black and white. Because you have to give a certain degree of justification as to why the person has acted as he has. I mean, if a person is pure evil, okay. He's just evil. He doesn't have a reason about why he has to kill or why he has to commit a crime. He just does it and it becomes himself. And in my book, yes, it is based in Calcutta. It is more of a locked room murder mystery involving multiple characters in a family, each on them having a motive to commit the crime. And if I take the example of my book and take some of the character names, and I assume that some of the audience would be familiar with my book. There is a patriarch of the family, Pranab Ganguly, who is a distinguished professor and educationist, has a distinguished career, but he himself has a dark secret which he has to hide. His wife, Arati, is fiercely protective towards her family and is extremely devoted and loyal to her husband, so much so that she might even kill for them if necessary, as she mentions in one particular passage to the detective. So that is also, though in spite of her loving nature, she has that violent streak in her, that if necessary, she is willing to go to any extent. Pranab's son, Abhishek, he is a loving family man with a wife and son. He has a good dynamics with the rest of the family members as well in the joint family, but he is forced to act, or rather take certain illegal steps just to guard against certain actions which has a fallout due to a certain addiction of his. And then there is the murdered woman's husband, Devashish, who, for all his good traits, has a fierce streak of jealousy in him, and who might be willing to go to any lengths if he feels that his family is threatened. Gaurav and Chandan, the sons of Devashish, they each have a secret of their own, which might be against the family's interests. One of them is actually involved in the Naxalite movement, which leads to certain actions of his, which has an indirect bearing on the story. And then there is a character called Bhaskar, who is a pivotal character and a friend of one character mentioned as Devashish, who is a bit of a debauched character involved in a lot of addictions which normal society would frown upon. But at the same time, he has a strong feeling of what is right, what is wrong, a certain degree of loyalty that if he is entrusted with something, he will carry it out to the end. And then, of course, there's a murdered woman herself, who throughout the story has been reviled as an ill-tempered, arrogant person, mean person, who doesn't get along well with anybody. But whether she really is that, or whether there's more to her than meets the eye. So all these characters over the influence, almost each and every character has shades of grey in them, which gives them, each of them, a motive to commit a crime if necessary. And at the end, yes, sorry.
It also adds narrative tension, because you don't really get a fix on the person. The reader is also trying to figure out, okay, who is this character? Because there is a certain element of mystery about them. It's not just what you see on the surface. You always suspect that there's more going on with them, which kind of adds to the narrative tension, and which is an extra mystery. Apart from the actual mystery of who killed whom, there is also all this tension about, okay, who is this character? Who is this person? Was he or she involved? Why are they behaving like this? So that element of tension is very welcome for the reader, I feel.
Yes.
So now, what is the work that you are writing right now? Is it in the same genre? Can we look forward to a mystery from you soon?
Yes, it's kind of this. I'd like to create a sequel to this character. Yes, definitely. But at the same time, I've written a second book, which is a collection of 4 novellas. And 2 of them are in the supernatural regime. One is a pure thriller, a rather violent thriller, if I can add. And one more is also certainly that deals with the paranormal. So the collection of 4 novellas that is ready, and the first draft is done. So hopefully that will be out soon. And I've also started work on the 3rd book. Just the genesis of the story has been created. That is also a thriller. And after that, I might bring Rudradeep Bray back for a second adventure.
Rudradeep is the main detective in your novel, The Dead Don't Talk.
Yes.
So we can look forward to him coming back. Yes.
Right. And
so I hope that we get to read all these thrillers very soon. And good luck with all your writing. It was lovely talking to you.
Thank you, Vineetha. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.